Are you ready for a moment when an abandoned apple orchard becomes the focal point of an interstellar showdown? Imagine newly allied offworlders converging on a rural patch of Earth, each with a hidden motive, while an everyday homeowner stands at the center of the chaos, determined to protect an Ionian princess from a cosmic corporate tyrant. This story dives into daring rescues, advanced technology repurposed from common appliances, and uneasy alliances forged to outwit a powerful foe. If you want to unravel how a humble orchard can tip the balance in a galactic power struggle, stick around until the end. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing thrilling tales like this one, and many more to come. Ethan Carter clung to the top rung of his creaking aluminum ladder, squinting through the late afternoon sun at the sprawling patches of water damage discoloring the shingles above him. At 29, he had convinced himself that buying a fixer-upper on the outskirts of Garden Grove was his ticket to financial independence, or so he'd believed when he first signed the stack of paperwork 3 months prior. Now, high up on this ladder with an unsteady grip on a caulking gun and an ominous storm front brewing in the distance, he was less convinced of his own brilliance. The roof repairs had become a recurring weekend ritual, each session undone by the next onslaught of rain. Sighing, Ethan pressed his palm against a stretch of wet, softened shingle, feeling the cold dampness bleed through his work glove. Water had leaked into the attic more times than he wanted to admit. His carefully placed tarps and patch kits were, at best, temporary fixes. He tried to focus on the positives. He'd always been a do-it-yourself kind of guy, relishing every chance to learn a new skill. When his friends teased him for reading home repair manuals cover to cover, he'd respond with a half-hearted grin, joking that it was cheaper than therapy. In truth, these small projects gave him a sense of control, something he felt he'd been missing since his last relationship ended. Ever since Clara had walked out in frustration, complaining that Ethan spent more time tinkering with old wiring and drafty windows than working on their future, he'd poured his energy into the house. If he could just get each leak sealed, each floorboard fixed, maybe he'd also patch the holes in his own confidence. Unfortunately, the weather never seemed to cooperate. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon yet again, an unsettling wash of navy and gray that promised another wave of heavy rain. Thunder rumbled somewhere above the rolling farmland beyond his cul-de-sac. "Just give me one more hour," Ethan muttered under his breath, as if bargaining with the weather. His arms ached from struggling with the ladder. The glare of the sun, sinking lower by the minute, caught the beads of sweat that gathered along his hairline. He wiped them away only to have his phone vibrate in his pocket. Nearly toppling, he slid one hand off the ladder to reach for the device. He recognized the number on the screen. His boss, Greg. Even though Ethan was supposed to be working remotely, an arrangement intended to give him a better work-life balance, it also meant Greg felt entitled to call at any time. "Yeah," Ethan answered, wedging the phone between his shoulder and ear. "Ethan Carter speaking." The line crackled with static, or Greg's usual brand of disapproval. Often it was hard to tell. "Carter," Greg snapped, "you know those system migration specs were due an hour ago, right?" Ethan grimaced, chilling the measuring tape in his hand. "I'm almost done, Greg. Just dealing with a small home emergency. I'll have it to you soon." "You're at home. That means you're on the clock," Greg warned, not clamoring around the rafters, pretending to be some weekend contractor. 30 minutes. No more excuses." Click, the call ended. Ethan exhaled sharply, annoyance and exhaustion colliding in the pit of his stomach. He'd recently begun to suspect Greg viewed work from home as code for be available 24/7. Another low rumble of thunder jolted him from his swirling thoughts. The wind nudged the ladder sideways, and Ethan decided wisely that it was time to call it quits on roof repair for the day. He packed his caulking gun away, vowed to return tomorrow, and began descending carefully. Just as his feet neared the safety of solid ground, a sharp, high-pitched whine tore through the sky overhead. Ethan looked up, expecting maybe a low-flying plane, but instead, he saw something that would forever change his life. A bright, purplish tear slicing across the storm clouds like someone had split open the fabric of reality itself. The whine shifted to a roar, and Ethan froze on the ladder, heart pounding. He watched, stunned, as the purple rift widened, crackling with energy. The swirling clouds around it took on an unnatural, deep violet hue. Then, in a single breathtaking moment, something or someone plummeted through the swirling void. The figure flashed through the sky in a tumbling spin, leaving a trail of shimmering sparks in its wake before colliding spectacularly with Ethan's half-repaired roof. Shingles, plywood, and fresh tar patches exploded outward in a hail of debris. Had it not been for the force of the impact shaking the entire structure, Ethan might have stayed frozen in disbelief. Instead, he lost his balance and fell backward off the ladder. With a gasp, he flailed for something, anything, to keep him from hitting the ground. His fingers scraped the gutter on his way down, slowing his fall just enough so that when he finally crashed onto his wet lawn, it hurt less than it could have. As he lay there, breath knocked out of him, Ethan stared up at the gaping hole in his roof. The swirl of purple in the sky closed almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only dark storm clouds and a rumble of retreating thunder. For a moment, Ethan could only register the obvious. He was alive. Wet grass clung to his shirt, and the entire right side of his body throbbed from the impact. The ladder had toppled onto a flower bed, crushing the geraniums he'd planted 2 weeks ago. But overshadowing that was a singular, borderline insane thought. Something had just fallen from the sky and crashed into his house. Hail? Meteorite? A piece of rogue satellite? None of those quite explained the flash of deep purple light or the distinctly humanoid silhouette he'd glimpsed in that split second before his roof caved in. "Please tell me my homeowner's insurance covers interdimensional rifts," Ethan muttered, staggering to his feet. If it did, he was certain it'd be hidden deep in some minuscule subclause. He darted into the house, skidding across the hardwood floors of the living room. There, a pile of splintered wood, shingle fragments, and scattered insulation formed a crater in the ceiling, letting in daylight and drizzling rain. As his eyes adjusted to the dust and chaos, he realized there was indeed a person, or something resembling a person, lying prone in the wreckage. She appeared to be a young woman, though that was where the familiarity ended. Her skin had a soft lavender tint that darkened to royal purple at her temples, traced with intricate, faintly glowing lines reminiscent of swirling constellations. Her hair floated around her in shimmering silver strands, defying gravity in gentle wisps that made her look like she was underwater. The rest of her form was draped in a sleek, form-fitting outfit that pulsed with the same violet light dancing across her body. Ethan's jaw dropped, and for a moment he simply forgot to breathe. The woman, if that was the correct term, stirred, pushing herself upright with unsettling grace. She fixed him with eyes that gleamed a brilliant, liquid azure, her pupils ringed by shifting lights. Ethan felt rooted to the spot, knees going weak as she took a deep, quivering breath and spoke. "Oh, excellent! I have arrived on the correct timeline." The woman's voice carried an almost musical accent, every syllable precise. As she stood, the intricate lines across her purple skin shimmered in waves of bright pink, like neon vines reacting to an unseen tide. She surveyed the room, eyes brimming with curiosity. Then she turned her attention back to Ethan, who was still gawking in stunned silence. "Are you injured?" she asked, stepping forward with a fluid elegance. She reached out a hand. Her nails were elongated, faintly sparkling at the tips. Ethan automatically raised his own in a defensive gesture, but gently allowed her to help him steady himself. Her grip was unexpectedly warm, sending a soft current of energy through his palm. If an alien from a cosmic rift was going to kill him, he reasoned, she probably wouldn't bother with a polite handshake first. "What? Who? How?" was all Ethan managed to stammer. He glanced upward at the ragged hole overhead, where water dripped from the edge of torn shingles onto the wreckage of his living room. "You just fell through my house." She followed his gaze, flicking a strand of silver hair from her face. Her expression shifted into what looked like mild embarrassment. "Yes, I do apologize. I attempted to calculate a softer entry vector, but the warp corridor was compromised by pursuing drones. As for your roof, well," she shrugged, and the lines on her skin rippled with contrition. "I will make reparations once we have properly introduced ourselves." The notion of an alien life form, if that's what she was, promising to fix his roof was so absurd that Ethan almost laughed. But the sincerity in her eyes disarmed him. Name's Ethan Carter," he said at last. His heart was still hammering. He managed to exhale as if trying to calm himself enough to speak more than 2 words at a time. "Celeste," she replied, placing a hand over her chest. A subtle swirl of rose-hued light enveloped her fingertips, as though responding to the mention of her name. "I hail from what your star maps might refer to as the Ionian Belt, though our people use a term untranslatable in your Earth tongues. I have come here," she paused, lines of light dancing across her cheeks, "seeking a suitable life partner." Ethan blinked. "You, traveled through space for a date?" The question came out drier and more sarcastic than he intended. In truth, every rational part of him wanted to believe he was dreaming, or that he'd suffered a concussion. Celeste's lips curved into a soft, amused smile. "Our customs are rather different. By the old treaties of the Galactic Consortium, a member of the Ionian royal house who flees an unwanted betrothal has the right to choose a champion on any recognized planet. According to subsection 14, clause 2, if that champion shelters her from capture—" "Wait," Ethan interrupted, struggling to keep pace with her matter-of-fact recitation of alien laws. "You were fleeing something? Like an arranged marriage?" She drew closer, her eyes flaring with a sudden luminescence. "Yes, from Drenak, an influential corporate magnate who intends to force me into a merger that would give him dominance over my sector. I do not wish to become his trophy. I sought a place where I could find genuine companionship, free from political plotting. And my studies of Earth's transmissions suggested I might find that authenticity here." Ethan stared. "You studied Earth, then targeted my roof?" Thunder rumbled outside, a reminder of the storm that had yet to fully break. Rain had begun tapping softly on the broken edges of the roof above them. Celeste brushed a few scraps of shingle from her shoulder, as though they were mere inconveniences. "Precisely," she answered with a gentle tilt of her head. "In my research, I discovered your renovation logs, video recordings in which you speak of your home's history, the repairs you attempt, and the heartfelt way you discussed wanting to restore something rather than demolish it. That ethos is uncommon among advanced species who typically prioritize expedience over sentiment. I found your dedication compelling." Ethan's cheeks warmed. Suddenly, the mortifying memory of all those hours he'd spent ranting to an online audience about rotted drywall and questionable electrical work seemed dangerously public. He had a modest following, people who shared tips, commiserated about old houses, or just liked his sarcastic sense of humor. The idea that an alien princess had been watching was as bizarre as it was oddly flattering. "You found my videos and decided I'd be your champion? Because I try to salvage old door frames?" Celeste's violet eyes softened. "Because you seem to care deeply, not only for efficiency, but for the stories contained in these structures. It signals sincerity, a reluctance to discard something simply because it is flawed. I hoped you might apply that same devotion to a partner who arrived with complications of her own." Her voice dipped slightly, as though hinting at a vulnerability beneath her poised exterior. Before Ethan could fully process her words, he caught movement outside the gaping hole. At first, he imagined it was the swirl of the storm, but then came a stark red glow flickering across the side of his neighbor's house. Celeste's expression shifted instantly, lines on her skin gliding from rosy pink to a sharp, warning indigo. "Drenak's drones," she breathed, her voice taut. "They must have followed me here. They'll intend to recapture me before I can officially claim Earth as my sanctuary." Ethan inched toward his front window, peering outside. Hovering just above the soggy lawn, 3 sleek metallic spheres glowed with eerie red scanning light. They zigzagged in the rain, methodically mapping the structure. One pivoted sharply, pointing a circular lens at him through the window. Celeste," Ethan said, stepping back. "They see us." She nodded grimly, glancing around for anything she could use as a weapon. Her gaze landed on a battered old toaster in a box near the kitchen, another one of Ethan's salvage projects. "That is a device for quick heat conduction?" she asked, half statement, half question. "Yeah, a toaster," Ethan replied, trying not to sound absurd as he realized the seriousness of the situation. "Wang. Stand aside," Celeste ordered, picking up the toaster with one hand and rummaging under the sink for a roll of duct tape. Her other hand glowed with pulsing pink light that began to merge with the toaster's metal casing. I have an idea. It may not be subtle, but it could disable their scanning technology. A sizzling hiss erupted from the toaster as Celeste began calibrating it, somehow into an impromptu electromagnetic blaster. Ethan's heart hammered with that familiar mix of fear and adrenaline. He realized, with a surreal sort of calm, that he was witnessing a literal alien forging a makeshift weapon from his outdated kitchen appliance to fight drones belonging to her jilted interstellar suitor. Outside, the drones took formation, their humming intensifying until it resonated through the walls. One fired a red beam that blasted a tidy hole in the side of Ethan's mailbox, sending shards of metal flying. Ethan ducked, adrenaline spiking. They're destroying my property. How am I supposed to explain this to my insurance? Celeste responded with unwavering focus. She taped a coil of wire around the toaster's heating element, then pressed her palm against the device. Faint arcs of purple electricity crackled between her hand and the repurposed toaster. Apologies in advance if this causes electromagnetic interference in your neighborhood. I'll do my best to contain the radius. Ethan nearly laughed hysterically. Only a day ago, his worst concern is a leaky roof and a nagging boss. Now he was apparently an accomplice in an alien standoff, about to hurl a toaster-turned EMP device at a swarm of advanced drones. He wasn't sure whether to cringe or celebrate how drastically life had changed in the span of an hour. "Ready?" Celeste asked, stepping up to the shattered window. Rain spattered her face, but she didn't flinch. The swirling lines on her cheeks glowed brighter. Ethan noted that with each flicker of her skin, his own heart seemed to thud more heavily, as if her presence alone radiated a tangible energy. Not in the least, he admitted, but his fear was overshadowed by a strange surge of determination. If these drones were here to abduct her, or worse, he wasn't about to just hide behind the sofa. He grabbed a length of 2x4 from the wreckage. It wasn't exactly a laser gun, but it was better than empty hands. Celeste raised the toaster contraption, aimed it toward the nearest drone, and released a burst of pulsating purple light. There was a sharp crackle. Ethan's hair stood on end as static electricity rippled through the house. The drone jerked in midair, its red scanning lens flickering wildly. Then, with a final spark, it crashed onto the lawn, smoking and inert. "Holy!" Ethan's exclamation was cut short by a second drone whizzing sideways, aiming another red beam at the window. Celeste dropped, narrowly avoiding the searing line of energy that scorched Ethan's curtain rod. He swung the board, as if that could stop a futuristic orb from blasting his home to pieces. In response, the drone's single lens flared menacingly. Suddenly, Celeste lunged from her crouch, pressing the toaster device right against the sphere. Another burst of purple arcs crackled, and the drone collapsed with a hiss. The third drone pulled back, as if rethinking its strategy, then zipped upwards through the downpour out of sight. "That might not be the last we see of them," Celeste cautioned, breathing heavily. The lines on her arms pulsed in quick succession, a sign of agitation or exertion. Ethan couldn't be sure. Dranak's forces typically operate in waves. Even if we've disabled two, he'll send more, unless we can sever their lock on my signature. Ethan tossed the 2x4 aside and wiped rainwater from his brow. The adrenaline left him shaky, but also fiercely protective. He glanced around his destroyed living room. So much for all those renovations. "We'll worry about your signature after we handle the hole in my ceiling," he said, half joking. "But first, let's get you somewhere safe." The expression that flickered across Celeste's face was almost tender, the swirling lines on her cheeks turning a soft rose hue. "You would help me? Even though I landed here unannounced, bringing danger?" He hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "Well, you didn't ask me to sign any marriage contract just yet, right?" Celeste smiled, a delicate curve of her lips that made her eyes seem impossibly bright. "According to the ancient laws of the Ionian royal house, the moment you harbor me from pursuit, you are effectively recognized as my prospective partner. But we can negotiate the formalities after we survive Dranak's interference." Ethan's stomach did a small flip. That was a lot to take in, the possibility that harboring Celeste effectively entangled him in an alien betrothal. He swallowed hard, mind buzzing with questions, Could she possibly be serious? Would this put a target on his back? What did partner actually mean in Ionian terms? Still, the notion stirred something unexpectedly hopeful in him. He reminded himself to focus. There were bigger issues like not getting vaporized by advanced drones. He helped Celeste navigate around the broken glass and plaster, then guided her into the kitchen. Under the flickering fluorescent light, she looked more mesmerizing than ever, her skin shimmering with each breath. She seemed distracted by the mundane earth objects around her. "Your dwelling is quite quaint," she murmured, running a finger along the countertop. "You use these mechanical appliances instead of molecular converters?" Ethan wasn't entirely sure how to answer. "Yeah, they're conventional. Earth technology. We don't have fancy warp-based cooking devices or whatever you're used to." His eyes landed on the battered microwave. It was old, the buttons nearly worn off, but it functioned well enough until now at least. After seeing her creative repurposing of the toaster, he dreaded what she might do to this poor thing in the name of alien science. A crash from the living room made them both jump. Through the doorway, Ethan saw a short figure in black tactical gear climbing through the roof hole. "Celeste, I think we've got more visitors." Dranak's crew had arrived in person, apparently done with remote drones. The intruder leveled a sleek, tube-like weapon. Celeste thrust out her palm, and a ripple of violet light emanated from her body, slamming into the attacker with a force that sent him sprawling onto the rubble. Ethan stared in awe. "That's some skill you've got there." "Pulsed neurowave," she explained, slightly winded. "Part of my birthright from the Ionian bloodline. It temporarily disables motor functions in non-Ionian species, but it drains me if I use it repeatedly." Ethan leaned against the wall, mind racing. "We can't keep fighting them off if they send squads. We need an actual plan, and also maybe call the police, though I doubt the local authorities are prepared for." "They'd be outmatched," Celeste cut in. "Dranak has access to technology that would confound your Earth agencies. Our best chance is to mask my presence and relocate. If I can hide for at least one Ionian cycle, he'll lose the legal right to reclaim me. That's how the consortium treaties work. After that, I can request formal asylum here." "Hide? Where?" Ethan thought about his leaky roof, his half-finished attic, and his bank account, which was mostly eaten up by home repair supplies. None of that screamed ideal safe haven. Celeste placed a hand on his shoulder. "Somewhere away from prying eyes. Your city outskirts might be best. We can gather resources to block my energy signature." A blast scorched the kitchen doorway, narrowly missing them. Bits of plaster sprinkled down. Ethan's heart pounded. This was no longer mere home repair territory. "All right," he decided, jaw tightening with resolve. "We'll make it work." The next few minutes were a blur of frantic preparation. They barricaded the broken window with a sheet of plywood Ethan had meant to use for patching the roof, hoping it might slow any further intruders. Celeste rummaged through the house, guided by Ethan's hurried explanations. The bedroom closet for spare clothes, the tool bench in the garage for equipment she might MacGyver into alien-blocking gadgets. Every moment, Ethan expected more black-clad soldiers to crash through the walls, but the storm outside seemed to have forced them into a strategic regroup. Ethan grabbed his laptop and phone. He left behind the half-done presentation for Greg. There were bigger things at stake now. As he stuffed his electronics into a backpack, he couldn't help one last glance at the chaos in the living room. Shattered drywall, broken beams, water dripping steadily onto what had once been brand-new hardwood floors. He swallowed a lump of dismay. This place had been his dream, a fresh start after his painful breakup. In the last hour, that dream had been twisted into a scene from a sci-fi invasion film. And yet, a tiny surge of excitement flickered in his chest. It occurred to him that, at some point in the not-so-distant future, he'd look back on this day and realize it was the moment everything in his life changed. For better or worse, the quiet, lonely path he'd set for himself, days blending into nights of solitary house repairs, had been blown wide open by Celeste's arrival. "Ethan," she called softly, peering around the kitchen door. "We should leave now. I sense more drones gathering." She pointed to the rumbling sky through the hole in the roof. Indeed, faint glowing orbs were visible in the thunderclouds, bobbing like ominous fireflies. He nodded, hoisting his bag. "Let's move." They slipped out the back, crossing the soggy yard. The rain had picked up, sending rivulets of water streaming off Celeste's silver hair. Her lines of luminescence flickered, either from the cold or from whatever tension brewed in her. Ethan was about to unlock his weather-beaten pickup truck when a voice made them both freeze. "Mr. Carter? What on earth is happening?" Ethan winced. Of course, Mrs. Ambridge. His nosy neighbor had a sixth sense for drama, especially if it gave her fodder to gossip about with the Garden Grove Neighborhood Alliance. She stood at her fence, umbrella in one hand, phone in the other, camera lens trained on them. "I heard a crash, saw lightning. Are you all right?" Her eyes shifted suspiciously to Celeste, who was clearly not just an average house guest. Thinking fast, Ethan forced a friendly, if shaky, grin. "All good here, Mrs. Ambridge. Just, a little power surge. My cousin Selena," he almost said Celeste, but caught himself. "She's here from out of town helping me. We're taking a drive to get a generator. Nothing to worry about." Mrs. Ambridge's mouth pinched in a clear sign of distrust. She gave Celeste a lingering once-over, possibly fixating on the faint glow around her eyes. But the neighbor eventually nodded, though not convincingly. "All right, if you say so, but you be careful. This weather is no joke." They hurried into the truck, hearts thumping. Celeste leaned toward the passenger window. "Your neighbor's curiosity may cause complications. Should I mask her memory?" Ethan switched on the ignition with trembling hands. "No," he said firmly. "We'll just have to manage. One crisis at a time." And with that, they sped off into the drenched streets, leaving the battered remains of Ethan's first real home project behind, unaware of just how much stranger this journey was about to become. They drove through the storm in tense silence, wipers thrashing against the downpour. Ethan couldn't help glancing in the rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit, floating or otherwise. His mind whirled with unanswered questions, apprehension mixing with a strange flicker of excitement. Next to him, Celeste kept the hood of her borrowed sweatshirt pulled low, concealing her luminous hair. The violet patterns across her cheeks had dimmed, as if she were purposely subduing her natural glow. "We need materials," she said quietly, watching the rain-swept streets slip by. "If we can craft a makeshift dampener for my energy signature, it should throw Dranak's scanners off. Then I can stay hidden long enough to formalize my plea for asylum." Ethan nodded, feeling the sticky cold of his soaked clothing cling to his skin. "We could try the big hardware store on Maple. They're open late, and I doubt you'll attract much attention there. It's mostly construction workers or fellow do-it-yourself junkies like me." Celeste glanced down at his phone, which lay in the console, buzzing intermittently with missed calls. He hadn't summoned the courage to check if Greg was leaving him more voicemails about the overdue system specs. One crisis at a time, he told himself. "Isn't your employer expecting you to respond?" Celeste asked gently. "He'll live." Ethan shrugged. "I've got bigger concerns right now." A pang of guilt stabbed through him at the thought of jeopardizing his job. But the day's surreal events had shoved mundane responsibilities into some far corner of his mind. Soon, fluorescent lights pierced the gloom as they pulled into the parking lot of Oak and Iron Hardware. Giant yellow letters glowed overhead, reflecting in the puddles. Only a handful of vehicles speckled the lot, and Ethan chose a space far from the entrance, hoping to avoid watchful eyes. As they hurried inside, Celeste's face remained half hidden under the hood, but her posture crackled with alertness. Despite the late hour, Oak and Iron was bustling with employees, restocking shelves, rolling out pallets of lumber, and reorganizing tool aisles. The smell of freshly cut pine mingled with the metallic tang of sawdust, a comforting scent to Ethan, who was used to spending weekends rummaging for supplies here. For Celeste, though, the surroundings seemed akin to stepping onto an alien planet. She moved from aisle to aisle with intense curiosity, occasionally asking him in hushed tones about items that intrigued her. A heavy-duty staple gun, a spool of copper wire, even a set of solar-powered garden lights. "We can incorporate some of these conductors into a feedback loop," she explained, her tone brightening with each discovery. "The idea is to broadcast false quantum echoes, harmless to humans, but misleading to Dranak's drones." Ethan kept a discreet lookout for any strange or threatening individuals. The store's overhead speakers played a jazzy instrumental tune, incongruous with the sense of danger thrumming in his veins. Yet no one seemed to be watching them too closely, and the employees were busy enough to let customers wander without interruption. You sure you can build a quantum echo device out of toasters and holiday lights? He murmured, trying to mask his anxiety with dry humor. Oh, not just that, Celeste replied, examining a multi-pack of light bulbs. Given enough time, I could build a short-range teleporter, but let's focus on dampening my aura first. That's more pressing. They filled the cart with random odds and ends, extra wiring, an extension cord rated for high voltage, sheets of reflective aluminum, copper coils, and a small toolkit. Ethan tossed in a tarp and roof repair supplies too. He hadn't forgotten that leaky ceiling. If he ever got back home, it would be even worse now with the new hole. He tried not to imagine the entire living room sagging under accumulated rainwater. Their shopping spree might have gone unnoticed if not for the person shadowing them through the lumber section. At first, Ethan assumed it was just another customer, but when the figure darted behind a display of power drills after Ethan spotted him, alarm bells rang in his mind. He eased the cart to a stop near a row of tarps and leaned toward Celeste. I think someone's following us, he whispered. Celeste didn't look up immediately, just examined a large roll of duct tape as though fascinated by its packaging. I feel it too, she said under her breath. His energy is subdued, but definitely there. Possibly a scout for Drenak. Ethan glanced at her uncertainly. Could it be a local who recognized you from the news? We haven't exactly been subtle. My neighbor might have blabbed already. Unclear, she murmured, returning the tape to the shelf. We can't risk a public confrontation. There are too many civilians here. Before Ethan could suggest a plan, the overhead speaker crackled. Oak and Iron will be closing in 15 minutes. Please bring your final purchases to the checkout. Employees began the familiar routine of straightening aisles, and a handful of remaining customers strolled toward the registers. Their unknown tail was likely to make a move soon. Here, Ethan said, steering the cart around a corner. They entered the plumbing section, a maze of PVC pipes and steel fittings. He gently nudged Celeste behind a tall display so they were out of sight. We'll try to slip out another way. The hush of the aisle crackled with tension. Beyond the shelves, they heard heavy footsteps approach, and then pause. Ethan felt his palms sweat. His mind conjured worst-case scenarios. Drenak's minions blasting holes in the building, injuring innocent people. It was becoming clear that this bizarre conflict extended beyond just his battered roof and half-finished renovations. Suddenly, a stooped figure rounded the corner, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low. He was clearly not an Oak and Iron employee. Ethan's gaze flicked to Celeste. Her posture had stiffened, faint luminescent lines rising along her wrists. If it came to a fight, she'd protect them. But the potential collateral damage churned Ethan's stomach. The stranger took another step into the aisle, and in that moment, an oblivious store clerk trundled by with a restocking cart, momentarily blocking his view. Ethan seized the opportunity. He grabbed Celeste's hand and darted down the opposite end of the aisle, cart rattling behind them. They made a sharp turn past the paint department, nearly colliding with an end-cap display of new arrival paint rollers, then veered into the main corridor leading toward the exit. They paid quickly at self-checkout, their hearts pounding. One or two curious glances from employees followed them, but no one tried to stop them. As they left, Ethan glanced over his shoulder and spotted the suspicious figure emerging from the plumbing section. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Then the man vanished behind a row of tall shelves as though he knew he'd been spotted. Outside, the rain had slowed to a fine drizzle, and the parking lot glistened under flickering lampposts. They hurried to the truck. Celeste carefully stowed their new items. Ethan slid into the driver's seat, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He half expected this suspicious man to appear from behind a car and open fire with some alien rifle. Drive, Celeste instructed softly. No sooner had Ethan turned the key than the headlights illuminated a figure stepping out in front of the vehicle. Too close for comfort. Ethan slammed on the brakes. The man from inside the store. He lifted a hand, signaling them to wait. Alarm rocketed through Ethan. But before he could throw the truck in reverse, the man reached into his jacket and produced a small silver disc, holding it up as if in surrender. Celeste tensed. Some kind of tracker? But the man shook his head and mouthed what looked like, I can help. Genuinely confused, Ethan and Celeste exchanged glances. Though every instinct told Ethan to step on the gas, Curiosity and perhaps the knowledge that if this individual wanted violence, he'd have tried it already, made him hesitate. He rolled down the window an inch. "Who are you?" "Name's Ferris," the man replied quietly, glancing around as if expecting an ambush. His voice was raspy, like he had once inhaled too much smoke. "I'm an independent contractor. Let's just say I've encountered Drenak's forces before. You aren't the first ones they've harassed on Earth." Ethan blinked. "Why follow us?" Ferris frowned. "I needed to see if you two were friend or foe. No easy way to approach you without risking my hide. Look, I know a place where you can lay low. That disk is a scrambled ID chip. It'll mask alien scans for a short range. Couple hours, maybe." Celeste's skin patterns began to pulse at a faster tempo, signaling deep suspicion. "And you're just offering this out of kindness?" "Kindness?" Ferris let out a grim chuckle. "Not exactly. Let's say it's self-preservation. Every time Dranak's stooges come here, they cause trouble. I'm tired of seeing Earth get used as a playground for their private vendettas. If helping you slows them down, I'm on board." Ethan glanced at Celeste, then back at Ferris. Rain slid across the windshield, and in the hush, he could hear his own heart pounding. "How do we know we can trust you?" Ferris gave a defeated shrug. "You don't, but if I wanted to turn you in, I'd have done it already. The scanners I carry could have pinged your location for Drenak's goons." He tossed the small silver disc through the window's gap. Ethan instinctively caught it. It was surprisingly warm. "Free of charge. Call it a peace offering." Reluctantly, Ethan looked to Celeste. He could see the conflicting impulses in her eyes: fight, flee, or accept help. Finally, she gave the faintest nod. "We can't handle this alone," she admitted in a low voice. "If he's telling the truth, it's too valuable to pass up." "All right," Ethan said. "Follow us, I guess." Ferris shook his head. "No, I'll find you. Best if we're not seen leaving together." Then, throwing another wary glance around the parking lot, he backed away and disappeared into the dark. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Celeste turned the silver disc over in her palm. "It emits counterwaves similar to an Ionian scramble," she remarked, a note of admiration creeping into her voice. "Whoever he is, his intel checks out." Ethan placed the disc on the dashboard, then carefully drove toward the exit. "We'll see if this is the break we need or just another trap." Either way, the possibilities had just multiplied. A new ally, albeit a mysterious one, had come out of nowhere, offering a temporary cloak from the very scanners hounding Celeste. They spent a tense, quiet night in a roadside motel on the edge of town, checking in under false names. Ethan insisted on using a last shred of normalcy, paying with his credit card, but Celeste pointed out how easily that could be tracked. In the end, they pulled the small bills in his wallet and hastily scribbled Jay and Linda Marshall on the motel's paperwork. When the young receptionist didn't even blink at their disheveled appearance, Ethan exhaled in relief. Inside the cramped room, Celeste immediately began laying out the supplies they'd bought at the hardware store. "We should build the dampener now," she announced, shrugging off the sweatshirt hood. The violet glow along her temples brightened once she no longer felt the need to hide it. Ethan studied her a moment, marveling yet again at how natural it was becoming to see those shifting lines on her skin. 6 hours ago, she was a complete stranger who crashed through his roof. Now the curve of her cheek felt oddly familiar, and the concern in her eyes, though alien in color, felt deeply human in the spirit. Nodding, he helped her set up on the chip motel desk. Wires, coils, and reflective aluminum paper quickly formed what looked like a bizarre science fair project. A small, whirring fan from the toolkit provided a power source once Celeste tweaked it. She explained in excited bursts how the device would project out-of-phase signals to confuse Ionian trackers. Ethan tried to follow along, but half of her terminology sailed right over his head. "Just tell me if I need to solder something," he finally said, brandishing a soldering iron he'd borrowed from the truck's emergency toolkit. Celeste laughed softly, pointing at the tangle of copper leads. "Right there. Your earth metals have surprising conductivity if arranged correctly." She paused, rummaging through the plastic bags. "We're missing a fuse." "You sure?" He double-checked the receipts. "I thought I grabbed a pack." She made a sound of mild frustration. "We got everything but that. The device won't hold stable power if the fuse link is incomplete. It could blow, or worse, short out and fry half our creation. Ethan rubbed a hand down his face. We can try a convenience store, but it's midnight. Doubt they stock fuses. Maybe tomorrow. A quiet beeping from Celeste's borrowed sweatshirt caught them off guard. She reached into the pocket and pulled out the silver disc Ferris had given. It vibrated slightly, and faint lights on its surface blinked. It seems our new ally is calling. She touched the surface, and a tiny holographic screen flickered to life. It revealed Ferris's face, shadowed as if he stood under a single bulb. I've got a lead on a place that might keep you off Dranak's radar a bit longer, he rasped. How did you? Ethan began, but Ferris cut him off. No time. I'm sending coordinates. It's an abandoned orchard just outside Garden Grove. Old structures, no cameras, no curious neighbors. I'll meet you there at noon tomorrow. In the meantime, keep the disc close. It's broadcasting a dampening field. Don't rely on it for more than 12 hours. Celeste thanked him, and the hologram blinked out. Ethan exhaled slowly. The orchard, the incomplete device, the possibility of more drones, everything weighed on him. He glanced around the dingy motel room. A single lamp flickered, casting their shadows against appealing floral wallpaper. Tomorrow then, he said, setting aside the partially assembled dampener, we'll get the fuse, finalize this thing, and see if Ferris's orchard hideout is legit. Celeste rose, crossing to him in 2 graceful steps. You've done so much for me already, she murmured. Are you certain you're okay with all this? Ethan tilted his head, offering a weary but genuine smile. I'd be lying if I said I'm not terrified, but I'm also in this with you, Celeste, if that's all right. Her skin lit with a gentle pink glow, and she placed a hand on his cheek. That's all I could ask for. Morning arrived with a haze of humidity clinging to the air. Outside the motel window, the rain-soaked parking lot glimmered under a timid sun. Ethan and Celeste left before the receptionist's shift ended, hoping to avoid any memory that might link them to the battered truck in the lot. They found a nearly empty breakfast diner across the street. The smell of sizzling bacon and stale coffee grounds washed over them as they slipped into a worn booth near the back. Celeste pulled the silver disc from her pocket again, checking the faint lights to confirm its diminishing power. We have maybe 5 hours left of effective dampening, she noted, stifling a yawn. I can't believe I'm tired. Ionian physiology is usually resilient. Must be the repeated conflict. Conflict tends to do that, Ethan replied ruefully, rubbing at the bruise on his shoulder where he'd hit the lawn the day before. The past 24 hours felt like a lifetime. A waitress approached, looking only mildly curious at Celeste's unusual features. Probably assumed it was dyed hair or a creative makeup job. Morning, hun. Ready to order? Ethan ordered eggs and coffee, carefully avoiding the waitress's inquisitive stare toward Celeste, who simply said, "Same, please," with a polite smile. The waitress left, and Celeste turned to watch a small TV mounted above the counter. Grainy local news flashed images of a suburban street corner, and a headline scrolled. Mysterious lights, possible UFO activity? Ethan's heart thumped. The broadcast cut to shaky cell phone footage from none other than Mrs. Ambridge. A partial glimpse of the swirling purple sky from the day before, then the aftermath of Ethan's roof with a big hole. The clip ended abruptly, leaving the anchor to speculate about viral marketing or an out-of-this-world intrusion. Your neighbor wastes no time, Celeste muttered, a wry twist to her mouth. I only hope the general public believes it's a hoax. Ethan groaned, picturing all the conspiracy forums that would be ablaze with theories. We'll handle that later. For now, orchard first, then finishing the dampener. We definitely need that fuse. When their breakfast arrived, Celeste eyed the coffee warily. We don't have such potent stimulant in Ionian culture, she mused, taking a tentative sip. Her skin flared a startled shade of light pink, and her eyes went wide. That is intense, Ethan smirked, stirring sugar into his cup. Welcome to the joys of caffeine. Careful, or you might end up vibrating with cosmic energy. She tested another sip, this time with more caution. I see why Earth is still powering itself the old-fashioned way. You're too busy refining coffee beans to perfect warp technology. He almost choked on his own coffee at that. Despite the looming dangers, moments like this made him realize how much he was starting to genuinely enjoy her. A day ago, that would have been unthinkable. Yet here they were, exchanging banter like old friends. Maybe that rumored Ionian ability to forge deep bonds was more than just legend. Or maybe, he thought, certain sparks just ignited under the strangest circumstances. They paid and left the diner, stepping into the damp morning air. Back in the truck, Celeste fiddled with the radio, her curiosity about human music spurring her to flip through channels in rapid succession. Ethan let her poke around, too tense to mind. He had an underlying sense of urgency, as if each passing minute gave Dranak more time to close in. 15 minutes later, they pulled into a nearby strip mall. Ethan needed an electronics store to pick up the fuse. Celeste volunteered to stay in the truck, scanning for any suspicious energy signatures. As he slid out of the driver's seat, he wondered, was it possible his life could ever go back to normal? A flicker of dread and relief mingled in his chest. Normal was overrated anyway. Inside the modest electronics shop, Ethan found a bored-looking clerk flipping through a magazine at the counter. Shelf after shelf of cables, adapters, and small circuit components lined the narrow aisles. He located a section dedicated to fuses, scanning the labels until he found the precise size Celeste had mentioned. As he approached the register, the overhead bell chimed, signaling another customer's arrival. Instinctively, Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Relief washed through him when it was just a teenager wearing headphones, not some black-clad alien operative. Still, he hurried to finish the purchase, mindful of the time ticking on their borrowed disc. "How's your morning?" the clerk asked with forced cheer as she rang up the items. "Busy," Ethan muttered, trying to keep the conversation short. He tapped his foot, eyeing the store's glass door for any sign of unexpected visitors. He gathered the small bag and headed back out. But the moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, a rush of frantic movement drew his attention. Across the parking lot, Celeste had flung open the passenger door. She stood half outside the truck, eyes scanning the sky. Ethan's heart lurched. Something was wrong. He sprinted over. "Celeste, what?" "There," she hissed, pointing upward. At first, Ethan saw only a bright morning sky streaked with thinning clouds. But then, a glint of silver darted from behind a bank of cumulus, another spherical drone. It circled high overhead, presumably scanning for Ionian energy signatures. "But Ferris's disk," Ethan began, feeling panic twist in his chest. "It's weakening," Celeste said, voice tight. "We're down to a fraction of its original power. I suspect Dranak's scanners can still sense faint traces if they get close enough." Ethan shoved the bag with the fuse into her hands. "Then we need to finish the dampener, now." They scrambled back inside the truck, shutting the doors behind them. Ethan revved the engine, scanning for an escape route. The drone was descending, red sensors flickering ominously. If Dranak's forces had pinpointed them, it wouldn't be long before ground troops showed up. "Coordinates," Celeste said, hooking the disc to the truck's air vent. "We head straight for the orchard. Coordinates Ferris gave him. We should have enough time to put the device together there." Ethan nodded, pulling out of the parking spot with squealing tires. He navigated onto a two-lane road leading out of the strip mall, checking the rearview mirror. Sure enough, the drone was trailing them from a distance. Whether it planned to attack or simply track them, neither possibility felt encouraging. They sped down side streets, weaving around slow-moving cars and ignoring honks from baffled drivers. The orchard Ferris mentioned was about 15 miles away, on the far side of Garden Grove, nestled in a patch of rural farmland once known for its apple groves. Ethan had vague childhood memories of picking apples out there on a school field trip. Now it felt like they were heading into the unknown with little more than the word of a stranger. The tension in the truck was palpable. Celeste's hands flew through the bag of supplies, pulling out the fuse and hooking it into the partially assembled device. Wires, duct tape, and scraps of aluminum foil spilled onto the dashboard. She worked feverishly, occasionally cursing an Ionian under her breath. "Ethan," she warned, glancing at the side mirror. "We may have company." He flicked his gaze to the mirror and saw a dark SUV accelerating behind them, swerving between lanes. It bore no obvious markings, but the tinted windows suggested something less than friendly. "Hang on," he gritted, pressing the gas pedal down harder. Speeding onto the rural highway, they left the suburban sprawl behind. The land opened up, dotted by old barns and wide fields now soaked from the recent storms. The SUV kept pace relentlessly, closing the distance. Celeste finished installing the fuse with a triumphant spark and powered up the dampener, only to have the truck's radio crackle and die, as if the device jammed all frequencies. Slight side effect, she explained hurriedly, adjusting a dial she'd fashioned out of what looked like a plumbing valve handle. But it's working. The dampener's generating false signals. Any Ionian scanner should read multiple echoes and lose our exact location. Then why is that SUV still on our tail? Ethan demanded, grimacing as the speedometer climbed higher than he'd ever dared on these winding roads. It could be a manual pursuit by visual confirmation, Celeste guessed. They must have seen us before we activated the dampener. The SUV pulled into the oncoming lane, angling to overtake. One black-gloved hand that emerged from the passenger window, brandishing a weapon that glinted unnaturally in the sunlight. A bolt of red energy shot past them, striking the pavement. Gravel and debris kicked up around Ethan's truck as he fought to keep control. "Watch out!" Celeste shouted, bracing herself against the dashboard. Ethan veered sharply, heart in his throat, expecting the next blast to tear through their tires. But the weapon jammed, perhaps from interference with the dampener. The SUV jerked back behind them as if regrouping. A battered sign rose ahead, proclaiming, "Applewood Orchard, 2 miles." Ethan turned onto a narrow dirt lane lined with apple trees in various stages of overgrowth. Fallen fruit littered the muddy ground. The orchard was indeed abandoned, the main barn's roof partially collapsed, windows broken. It felt like they'd driven straight into a ghost of a more prosperous era. Up ahead, a lone figure on a motorcycle waved them forward. Ferris, without slowing, Ethan barreled toward the barn, the SUV still looming behind. Ferris revved his bike and zipped alongside, gesturing to an open area behind the barn. "Park there," Ethan thought he heard him shout over the roar of engines. The instant Ethan's truck skidded to a halt in the muddy clearing, Ferris was off his motorcycle, producing a handheld device about the size of a flashlight. He pointed it at the oncoming SUV and fired a crackling pulse of blue-white energy. The pulse didn't break windows or pierce metal. It simply enveloped the vehicle in a momentary haze, causing the engine to sputter and die. The SUV's tires locked, leaving it fishtailing in the mud before lurching to a halt. "Stay inside," Celeste warned Ethan, but Ferris wasted no time. He sprinted across the clearing, leaving deep footprints in the mud. The SUV's passenger door flew open, revealing a figure in sleek black body armor. Another shot from Ferris's device forced the armored man into cover behind the SUV, cursing loudly in an alien dialect Ethan didn't recognize. "Drenax flunkies," Celeste whispered, confirming Ethan's suspicions. She yanked open the truck door and jumped out, ignoring the sticky mud. The orchard smelled of wet leaves, rotting apples, and ozone from all the energy blasts. Ethan followed, popping the driver's door open, mind racing. Maybe they should just keep driving. But the engine whined ominously, the truck no doubt battered from stray blasts. Besides, Ferris had stuck his neck out for them. Ethan refused to bolt and leave him behind. A brief firefight ensued. Ferris's device clashed with the black armored soldier's own alien weapon. Celeste raised her hands, launching a swirling wave of violet luminescence that crashed into the soldier with staggering force. The soldier dropped his gun, stumbling. Ferris pounced, delivering a swift blow to knock him unconscious. Panting, Ferris turned, his face streaked with mud. "That's one, but if we don't secure this area, more will come." Celeste pressed her hand to her chest, brow furrowed. "We've got a working dampener. But they might still track us by sight unless we fortify our perimeter." Ethan looked around the decrepit orchard, the sagging barn, the swirling clouds overhead. How exactly do we fortify an entire orchard from alien incursion? Ferris brushed past him, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. "We'll set up a boundary of scrambled beacons around the property. It'll take all our combined tech, but it can work, for a while." Ethan exchanged a glance with Celeste, who was already nodding. This was their best shot at staying off the radar, and from the looks of it, Ferris planned on sticking around. The abandoned orchard became a makeshift fortress over the next several hours. With Ferris's guidance, Ethan and Celeste hauled supplies from the truck, setting up the dampener and rigging smaller beacons that projected scrambled Ionian echoes. They planted them at key points along the orchard's perimeter, using fence posts and tree stumps as anchor points. While Ferris tinkered with the frequency modulator on each beacon, Celeste carefully fine-tuned the main dampener, wrapping copper wire in tight coils to stabilize the signals. Despite the cooperative effort, tension lingered. Ethan noticed the guarded way Ferris eyed Celeste, as though he still wasn't entirely certain of her motives. For her part, Celeste remained polite but distant, occasionally shooting Ethan puzzled glances whenever Ferris made an offhanded comment about other visitors he'd encountered over the years. Ferris's mysterious background hung between them like a question no one dared to ask aloud. As the day wore on, they managed to erect a rudimentary barrier using rusted metal sheets and wire netting around the old barn's entrance. The orchard, lush with tangled grass and overgrown apple trees, offered plenty of natural cover. From a distance, it looked deserted, a rundown property left to rot. Up close, the faint hum of quantum interference buzzed in the air, warping the orchard's quiet into an uneasy hush. With each newly activated beacon, the orchard felt more cloaked, like they'd stepped into a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Not a permanent solution, Ferris warned when they paused for a break, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. The energy signature from these beacons, scrambled as it is, can still draw attention if someone knows what to look for, but it's better than staying in motels or trying to hide in your truck. Ethan took a long drink from a canteen they'd found in the barn's dusty storeroom. Speaking of the barn, he said, turning to Celeste, I noticed some old generator parts in there. Maybe we can rig a power source that doesn't rely on the truck battery. Don't want to drain that completely. Agreed, she replied, tossing her silver hair over her shoulder. She tried to brush off the clinging cobwebs, unsuccessfully, as the orchard was full of them. The lines along her arms glowed with subdued lavender, a sign of fatigue. She'd been using her Ionian abilities to help weld loose metal and power the devices. Even an advanced alien physiology had its limits. Ferris crouched on a fallen tree trunk, fiddling with the final beacon. Your new wife is quite the multitasker, Carter, he remarked, though his tone was as neutral as ever. She's got the skill set of an engineer, a soldier, and an interstellar diplomat. Wife? Ethan echoed, momentarily flustered. He'd nearly forgotten that Ionian law considered them betrothed the moment he gave her shelter. He still wasn't sure how he felt about the label. Astonished, amused, strangely at peace all at once. Celeste's cheeks took on a faint pinkish glow. It's complicated, she said, selecting her words carefully. In Ionian culture, harboring someone from a rival suitor can trigger an immediate matrimonial bond. But I don't wish to impose those customs upon Ethan without his understanding. Sure you don't, Ferris muttered under his breath, standing up. He handed Ethan a small device. Motion sensor, place it near the orchard's edge. If any more of Dranak's ground troops approach, we'll get a heads up. Ethan nodded, trying not to let Ferris's skeptical undertone bother him. Maybe the man had his reasons for distrusting off-worlders. In any case, they had a common goal, keeping Celeste safe from the corporate magnates' relentless hunters. That was enough for now. Nightfall wrapped the orchard in an unsettling stillness, disturbed only by the soft crackle of the dampener's energy field and the distant call of owls. They'd cleared enough debris from the barn to set up rudimentary sleeping quarters. A couple of old cots Ferris had dragged out of the cobweb storage area, plus a patch of space where Celeste could continue tinkering with any electronics they salvaged. The barn smelled of must and rotted wood, and occasionally a startled mouse would dart across the dirt floor. After a quick meal of canned beans and stale crackers, courtesy of an unopened pantry box in the barn, Ethan stepped outside to check the perimeter. A ring of warped metal stakes stood around the orchard's boundary, each topped by a beacon that emitted pulses of scrambled Ionian signals. Moonlight shimmered on the apple trees, making the orchard look almost peaceful, if one ignored the patchy mud and abandoned equipment. He found Celeste standing beneath a gnarled apple tree, staring up at the stars through the drifting clouds. Her silver hair reflected the moonlight, and the violet lines on her temples glowed softly. She didn't turn at his approach, but her gaze remained skyward. You okay? Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. She nodded, though her shoulders sagged with what seemed like weariness. Just thinking about how vast the galaxy is. Growing up, I was taught that Ionian nobles had a responsibility to maintain equilibrium between star systems. To think my attempt at avoiding one forced betrothal has now led to this. She gestured at the orchard's improvised defenses, the battered barn. Feels so surreal. Ethan leaned against the tree beside her, feeling the rough bark press through his flannel shirt. We'll get through it, he offered, wishing he had something more substantial than vague reassurance. Ferris seems to know his way around Dranak's forces. Maybe once we're safe, we can figure out the legal asylum part. Celeste shifted her gaze to him, her eyes, that luminous azure, regarded him with an intensity that made his pulse hitch. And after that, what if the Ionian Council decides to reassert their claim on my marriage contract? They could demand I return to finalize a union I never wanted. Do you think your family would do that? He asked gently. She sighed, the lines on her cheeks dimming momentarily. They might. My father, in particular, sees any alliance as beneficial if it keeps Drenak from monopolizing Ionian trade. But I refuse to be a pawn. I want to choose for myself. Her voice carried a steely determination that reminded Ethan of how she'd fought off drones with little more than a toaster-turned EMP device. He hesitated before placing a hand on her shoulder, feeling the faint hum of her Ionian energy. You have a right to do that. I can't speak for your people, but on Earth, a marriage born of coercion isn't valid in any moral sense. Let them try to come after you. We'll stand up to them. Celeste's eyes flickered with warmth. Thank you. That means more than you know, Ethan. For a second, the orchard's hush enveloped them. No cosmic battles, no glaring drones, just a quiet moment of connection under the moonlight. Then a series of sharp beeps broke the silence. One of the motion sensors had triggered. The orchard's so-called sanctuary wasn't as uncharted as they'd hoped. They rushed back to the barn, where Ferris was already hunched over a portable monitor, displaying a crude map of the orchard. A blinking red light on the edge of the screen pulsed urgently. Perimeter breach, Ferris growled, tapping a button that cycled through camera feeds. Static flickered for a moment, then showed a dark silhouette moving among the apple trees, faintly illuminated by moonlight. Just one figure? Ethan asked, squinting at the blurry feed. Seems so, Ferris muttered. Could be a scout. I'll check it out. He slipped a small sidearm into his belt, an unremarkable gun by Earth standards, though Ethan suspected it contained a few modifications. I'm coming with you, Ethan offered, adrenaline spiking. He wasn't eager to charge into potential danger, but leaving Ferris alone while some unknown intruder prowled around felt wrong. Besides, the orchard was as much his shelter now as Celeste's. Ferris gave him a once-over, then shrugged. Fine, grab a flashlight. Keep the beam low so we don't give away our location. They crept into the orchard, following a narrow path that wound between rows of ancient apple trees. The damp grass muted their footsteps. Every now and then, a rotting apple squished under Ethan's boots, sending a pungent odor of fermented fruit wafting upward. A breeze rattled the leaves overhead, adding to the unease curling in Ethan's stomach. Closer to the orchard's edge, Ferris held up a hand, signaling a stop. They could just make out a shape crouched beside one of the beacon stakes, fiddling with its wiring. The figure wore a hooded cloak, face hidden in shadow. Ferris gestured for Ethan to circle around, and they flanked the intruder from opposite sides. Stop right there, Ferris barked. The intruder froze, then rose slowly, raising empty hands in a gesture of surrender. Ethan shone his flashlight on them, and what he saw nearly made him drop the beam in surprise. Beneath the hood was a woman with deep green skin, faintly lined with gold tattoos that curled around her jawline. An off-worlder, no doubt, but not Ionian. Who are you? Ferris demanded, edging closer. Are you working for Drenak? Stop! The woman's voice was unexpectedly soft. She pulled back the hood fully, revealing short, copper-colored hair and a set of metallic implants along her temples. I'm not his ally. I'm here to help, maybe. My name is Meryl. Ethan exchanged a look with Ferris, unsure whether to believe her. You were tampering with our beacon, he pointed out, still keeping the flashlight beam steady on her. Meryl exhaled, lowering her hands. I was adjusting its frequency. You're broadcasting a type of Ionian scramble, but it's incomplete. Anyone with more advanced detection could cut right through it. If you let me improve it, your orchard's cloak will be significantly stronger." Ferris's eyes narrowed. "How do we know you're not sabotaging us?" Meryl tapped one of her temple implants. "I was once under contract with Dranak's security forces," she admitted. "He uses mechs like me for infiltration. But I left, went rogue. The man is a tyrant, exploiting entire colonies, forcing Ionian nobles into marriage for political gain." She paused, glancing at Ethan. "Word travels fast on certain data streams. People say an Ionian princess is hiding out on Earth, refusing to marry him. I came to see if I could offer assistance." Ethan studied her uncertain posture, the earnestness in her eyes. Another potential ally or a double agent? Either way, they needed all the help they could get. "Look," he said, lowering his voice, "let's take her back to the barn. Celeste can confirm if she's telling the truth." Ferris blew out a sharp breath, then nodded. "Fine, but if this is a trick, I'm holding you personally responsible, Carter." Back in the barn, Celeste regarded Meryl with open curiosity tinged with wariness. The orchard's single lantern cast elongated shadows against the wooden walls, and the tension in the air felt as taut as a bowstring. Meryl repeated her introduction, adding more detail about her past. "I was modified at a young age," she said, tapping the metallic implants on her temples. "Enhancements to interface with advanced tech. Dranak's outfit used me for data infiltration, espionage mostly. But I've seen enough to know I can't keep enabling him. So I fled. Tracked rumors of this orchard, the Ionian princess, and a scrambler setup that was, let's be honest, pretty amateur from a hacking standpoint. I recognized Ferris's signature coding on the perimeter nodes." "You recognized my coding?" Ferris stepped forward, eyebrows raised. "That's supposed to be proprietary encryption." Meryl let out a small, humorless laugh. "Only to most, not to me. I could override these beacons if I wanted, but that's not why I'm here. I want to stop Dranak's power plays, not aid them." Ethan observed Celeste carefully, trying to gauge her reaction. She stood with arms folded, the lines on her skin glowing a subdued purple. After a few seconds, Celeste said, "Can you prove your loyalty?" Meryl's expression flickered as though she'd anticipated this question. "If you have a system capable of reading my memory logs, you'd see how I severed ties with Dranak. But that might compromise my own neural nets. I'm willing to do it if it gains your trust." Ferris and Celeste exchanged glances. Ferris spoke first, voice laden with caution. "We've got a device that can interface with Ionian code. I customized it for field work. If you're serious, we can use it to check a portion of your logs. But no deep scans. Don't want to fry your brain or ours." "Agreed, Indian." Meryl stepped closer to Celeste, lowering her voice. "And Princess, I want you to know that people across the galaxy admire what you're doing. Standing up to Dranak might seem like a personal matter, but it reverberates across countless worlds. He's bullied smaller systems into ruin, kidnapped nobility to force trade routes, leveraged entire planets for profit. If the Ionian house stands firm, others might follow." Celeste inhaled sharply, a spark of determination igniting in her gaze. "I'm not here to be a symbol. I only wanted freedom. But if that freedom can help others, then I'm honored to stand against him." Meryl nodded, stepping back. "Then let me assist. Your scramble field can't last forever, not unless we strengthen it. With the right modifications, we could generate a rotating frequency that adapts to Dranak's sensor sweeps. Give ourselves more breathing room." "It'll take all night," Ferris cautioned, eyeing the tangle of parts and cables scattered around the barn. "We can do it," Meryl insisted, her mechanical implants faintly pulsing as she surveyed the equipment. "Together." And so with the orchard bathed in moonlight, they began an impromptu engineering session. While Ferris rigged the interface to read Meryl's partial memory logs, Ethan helped Celeste gather scrap metal and electronics. The hiss of solder and the crackle of spliced wires filled the barn, punctuated by the occasional hoot of an owl outside. Despite Ethan's exhaustion, he felt an undercurrent of hope. Maybe, just maybe, these strangers united by necessity could push back against the looming threat and find a place for Celeste to truly belong. By early morning, the barn had transformed into a cross between a clandestine tech lab and an inventor's workshop. A haze of smoke and ozone hung in the air from countless hours of soldering and reconfiguring circuits. Celeste had fine-tuned the orchard's perimeter beacons with Merrill's help, adding rotating key signatures that shifted every few minutes. Ferris had successfully verified snippets of Merrill's memory logs, enough to confirm she wasn't currently under Dranak's control. Ethan paced outside, the chill of dawn prickling his skin. He'd taken it upon himself to stand watch, ensuring no uninvited visitors slink past the orchard's protective scramble. With all the advanced tech swirling around, he was the designated normal guy, armed only with a flashlight, a basic sidearm Ferris had lent him, and a powerful desire to keep everyone safe. He paused at the orchard gate, noticing that the morning sun painted the sky in faint tangerine hues. The battered truck, caked in dried mud, loomed near a collapsed fence. Remembering how carefree life had been just a week ago, when his biggest concern was Greg's nagging calls, felt surreal. Now he was guarding a piece of orchard that served as a fortress against interstellar mercenaries. He wasn't sure how this story would end, but a small part of him felt grateful for the surge of purpose. No more lonely nights fussing over leaky ceilings. The world, or rather the galaxy, had forced him out of his comfort zone. Footsteps approached behind him. Celeste stepped up, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked quietly. "All quiet," he said, offering a tired smile. "How's the upgrade going?" She exhaled a small laugh, tucking a stray lock of silver hair behind her ear. "Slow but promising. Merrill's knowledge of infiltration tech is remarkable. Between her and Ferris, I think we've achieved a protective field that might deter all but Drenak's most direct assault. Of course, that's assuming he doesn't descend in person." Ethan grimaced at the thought of a full-blown attack. "Guess we'll keep an eye on the sky. Anyway, you should rest. You've been at this all night." Celeste shook her head. "I can't rest. Not until we have a clearer plan." She hesitated, then reached for Ethan's hand. The warmth of her palm contrasted with the cool morning air, and he felt that familiar tingle from her Ionian energy. "I know how unusual this is. Meeting me, being pulled into an alien conflict, hearing talk of marriage under ancient laws. If you want to step away at any point, I'd understand." Something in Ethan's chest clenched. He remembered the heartbreak he'd gone through when Clara left, how it had stripped him of confidence in relationships. But looking at Celeste now, exhausted yet steadfast in her resolve, he realized he didn't want to run. "I might be terrified," he said quietly, "but I'm not walking away. We're in this together, right?" She smiled, a hint of relief flashing across her features. "Together," she repeated, her skin glowing a soft lavender that nearly matched the sky. A crackle of static from Ethan's walkie-talkie, a mundane Earth model attached to his belt, interrupted the moment. Ferris's voice came through, scratchy but urgent. "Carter, Celeste, get back in here. Merrill's picking up a priority signal. Something big is happening in orbit." Exchanging a quick glance, they took off toward the barn, hearts pounding. Maybe the orchard's new defenses would be tested sooner than they'd hoped. Inside, they found Ferris and Merrill huddled around a jury-rigged console of screens and holoprojectors. Wires spiraled across the barn floor like steel vines. Merrill manipulated a makeshift control pad, her temple implants glowing in tandem with the data she processed. A shimmering display floated above them, a readout of Earth's upper atmosphere. "Look," Merrill said, gesturing to the screen. "Multiple objects entering low orbit, not Dranak's usual drones or even his personal cruiser. This is bigger." Ferris clenched his jaw. "Galactic Consortium ships. They must have caught wind of the Ionian princess's presence and decided to intervene." Celeste drew closer, her violet eyes scanning the holographic data. "The consortium rarely shows up for smaller disputes. If they're here, it means Dranak might have escalated the situation, possibly lobbying for Ionian compliance. If the consortium sees him as legitimate, they could legally demand my return." Ethan's heart sank. "Meaning you'd be forced into that marriage arrangement?" "Worse," Celeste murmured. "They could drag me into a formal hearing, one that's stacked in Drenak's favor. He has deep pockets. Bribing or influencing consortium officials isn't unheard of. The Ionian house has power, but Drenak's corporate reach often surpasses traditional nobility in certain galaxies. Meryl's implants blinked rapidly. I'm cross-referencing. Some of these signatures are official consortium judiciary vessels, but at least one belongs to the Ionian diplomatic corps. Seems your house might be sending a representative too. That's my father's mark. Celeste's voice quivered, a swirl of bright pink flashing along her cheeks. I have to assume he's here to ensure the Ionian line remains intact, and that means presenting me to the court, one way or another. Ethan raked his fingers through his hair, trying to quell the panic rising in him. So the orchard's about to be the center of an interstellar legal showdown? That's not how I envisioned my property restoration project going. Ferris turned to Celeste. We could bolster the orchard's cloak, but the consortium has authority to land wherever they please. They'll detect an anomaly and investigate. We might buy time, but eventually they'll show up at our door. Meryl set down her control pad, exhaling softly. You might consider turning this situation around. Present your case to the consortium before Drenak does. If you can prove he's been coercive, they might rule in your favor. Galactic law is complicated, Celeste admitted, chewing her lip. Still, it might be our best shot. If I hide indefinitely, Drenak can claim I'm fleeing legitimate authority. But if I stand my ground and show proof of his manipulations, Ethan's gaze darted between them. That means you'd have to reveal yourself publicly, right? Let the entire galaxy know you're here on Earth? She nodded, meeting his eyes. If it ensures my freedom and spares Earth from more of Drenak's wrath, I'll do it. Ferris half smiled. A bold move. We can help gather evidence. Meryl's memory logs, footage of Drenak's drones attacking your house. My guess is the local news fiasco with your neighbor's footage might even help confirm extraterrestrial aggression. Ethan flashed back to that moment Mrs. Ambridge had filmed his broken roof, the swirling lights in the sky. Who would have thought we'd rely on her gossip footage to sway galactic law? Celeste placed a hand on his arm, her skin glowing with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Let's not underestimate the power of human tenacity. If Drenak wants a legal battle, we'll show him Earth won't be bullied, and neither will I. We'll gather everything we can, contact the consortium, and force a hearing on our terms. Ferris exchanged a glance with Meryl, who gave a curt nod. I'll relay a comm signal to the judiciary ships. Let them know we have a formal request for arbitration, Meryl said. Brace yourselves, everyone. A showdown's coming to the orchard. Looking back on this whirlwind of cosmic alliances, hard-fought battles, and surprising friendships, one thing stands out. Even the most ordinary among us can rise to extraordinary challenges when given the chance. From a house with a leaking roof to an orchard repurposed as a makeshift fortress, every scrap of effort added up, proving that resourcefulness in heart can level the playing field against massive powers. Celeste's bravery showed us that genuine bonds aren't forged by old rules or forced contracts. They flourish through shared trust and a willingness to fight for what's right. Ferris and Meryl demonstrated that redemption and unity can emerge from even the darkest corners of a galaxy-spanning conflict. As for me, I've learned that a single unexpected encounter can rewrite an entire life's trajectory, maybe even a planet's. What do you think about their journey? Share your thoughts below, and let's keep this conversation alive. Feel free to discuss theories, favorite moments, or what might happen next. After all, stories are best when we build on them together.